Welcome back to another Roblox Studio tutorial. In this video, I'm going to redo the shop GUI. I've been getting a lot of questions on these, so what I'm going to do is just combine everything into one video so that there's no confusion as far as like where to start or anything like that. So hopefully this will make everything more clear, and let's go ahead and dive in and get started. Alright, so this video is going to end up being quite a bit longer than my normal videos, but I'm going to try to show you all the steps so that everything is super clear. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get a shop from the toolbox. To do that, I just type shop up in the search bar, and then I'm going to use this one right here, but you can use whichever shop you want to. I'm going to rotate the shop so it's facing toward me. Alright, so that looks good. You can either use a shop from the toolbox, or you can make your own if you want to. This part of it's not really critical, so as long as there's nothing crazy inside of the shop as far as scripts or anything like that, you should be good to go. The next thing we're going to do is place a part in front of this shop, and that's the part the player is going to be able to touch to open up the menu. So to do that, we're going to go up to part here and insert a part into the game. Go ahead and put it in front of your shop, and then we're going to use the scale tool to resize it. I'm just going to stretch it to the right a little bit so it's the same size as the shop. And then I'm going to compress it down a little bit so it's thinner. If you want to, you can make this part invisible by clicking on the part and going under the properties menu. Under here, you're going to be looking for transparency. And if you want to make it invisible, you would change that to 1. So you can have this part invisible, so whenever the player walks up to it, it'll still open up the menu. It just won't be visible in the game. For this video, I'm just going to keep it visible. After that, we're going to rename this part. So over in the Explore menu, you're going to right click and then press rename. For this part, I'm going to rename it to Open Part. The reason we're going to rename this part is so that it's easier to work with later on in the script. And if you have a bunch of parts with the same name in your game, it may cause you issues. So it's always a good idea if you're going to be using a part in the script that you rename it to something unique. After that, we're going to click on this part and then we're going to duplicate it. And you can do that by pressing Ctrl D. After that, we're going to move the part back a little bit. And for this part, we're going to rename it to Close Part. And what we're going to do with these two parts is we're going to use this one right here. Whenever the player touches this part, we're going to open up the menu. And then when the player closes the part, we're going to teleport them back to this part over here. And before we move on to the scripting, we're going to do one more thing with these parts, and that is anchoring these parts. So to do that, you just click on the part, and then click on Anchor. Do the same for both parts. The next thing we're going to do is create a simple frame so that we can open it whenever this part gets touched. So to do that, what we're going to do is scroll down in the Explorer menu. You're going to locate Starter GUI and click on the plus sign. After that, you're going to click on Screen GUI. Inside the Screen GUI, we're going to add a frame. So click on the plus sign and add a frame. Here's your frame up here. So what you can do is click on it and resize it. You can make it whatever size you want to. That looks good for now. We'll be making some changes to this later on, but that's good enough for testing. If you don't want this to be in the way while you're working with other things in the game, you can go up here and click on UI, and that'll hide all the UI elements in the game, so that if you want to work on some modeling, you can do that too. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and start working on this script. So to do that, we're going to be adding a local script into this frame. So let's go ahead and click on the plus sign and then add a local script. The first thing we're going to do in this script is create some different references for the different parts. Let's go and start by saying local, open. So this is going to be a variable for this part right here. And this is going to be equal to. And the part we're going to put on the other side is like a reference for it. So basically this is where it's located in the game. So we're going to start with the word game. And then inside the game, it's in the workspace. So we're going to say dot workspace. Inside the workspace, the name of the part is open part. So we're going to say dot and then open part. And we're going to do the same thing for our other part. So we're going to say local. For this one, we can call it close. And this is going to be equal to game dot workspace, since it's in the same spot. And this time, the name of this part is close part. So we're going to say dot and close part. Okay, we're also going to create a variable for this frame. To do that, we're going to say local frame, and this is going to be equal to script dot parent. And the first thing we want to do is make this frame invisible when the player first spawns into the game. So to do that, we're going to say frame dot visible. So this is the frame's visible property, and you can set that manually by looking under the frame. And if you scroll down a little bit, there's a property that says visible. So by setting this equal to true, it'll make the frame visible, and by setting it equal to false, it'll make it invisible. So since we want it invisible, we're going to say equal to, and then false. So what this does, it unchecks this box, and it'll make the frame invisible when the player first spawns into the game. So let's go and stop here for a second and test out the code, just to make sure there's no mistakes. So everything looks good so far. When I spawn into the game, there's no frame. Alright, so let's go ahead and continue now. The next part we want to work on is making the frame appear whenever a player touches this part right here. So let's go and do that. So let's go and open up the script. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a function that'll open up this frame whenever the part gets touched. What I'm going to do before we start with the function is actually define the event first. So we're going to be working with a touch event. So to do that, we're going to start with the part. And in our case, we name this part open. So we're going to say open dot touched. So touched is the event. And then when this event happens, we're going to connect this with a function. So we're going to say colon and connect. We haven't made the function yet, so I'm going to leave the parentheses empty for now. So we're going to go ahead and start working on this function now. So for this function, we're going to say local and then function. The name of our function can be something like shop menu. So we're going to say shop menu. And then we're going to put parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put a parameter, and that's going to be other part. So whenever this part gets touched, what's going to happen is it's going to send a piece of information to this function, and that piece of information is going to be whatever other object touches the part. So for example, if a player goes up to touch this part, then likely the foot or the leg is going to touch it. So other part is going to store that foot or that leg. Inside the function, we're going to start by figuring out what player that object belongs to. So we're going to say local player, and this is going to be equal to game dot players. So what I'm talking about now is this folder up here. So this is the players folder, so whatever players are in your game get stored in this folder here. So inside this folder, we're going to be searching for something. So we're going to say colon and then find first child. And what we're going to be looking for is we're going to start by saying other part. So that'll be the body part. We're going to say dot parent. And this will get the player's model. From the player's model, we're going to get the name by saying dot name. And then what we're doing essentially is taking the player's name and making sure that player exists within the player's folder. After that, we're going to say if player. So what that means is if it was able to find the player inside the folder, then what we're going to do is we're going to open up this frame. And we're going to do that by only opening up the frame for the particular player. To open up the frame for the particular player, we're going to start with the player. And then inside the player, there's a player GUI. Inside the player GUI, we have a screen GUI. Inside the screen GUI, we have a frame. And then for this frame, we're going to say dot visible. And we're going to set this equal to true. Okay, so now that we finished with our function, we're going to add it to the connect right here. So inside the parentheses, we're going to put shop menu. Okay, so what we're doing is whenever this part gets touched right here, it's going to trigger a touch event, which is what we defined right down here. Whenever that happens, we're going to connect that with a function. The name of our function is shop menu. So whenever that happens, it's going to run this function up here. The first thing we're doing inside this function is trying to find the player. And we do that by taking the body part that touches the part, finding the player's player model, and then taking their name. We take that name and search for that player in the player's folder. If we're able to find that player, then we're going to open up the frame for that player, by starting with that particular player, accessing their player GUI. From there, we're taking a look at the screen GUI and then the frame, and we're setting its visible property equal to true. So let's go ahead and run the game and check to make sure this part works. Alright, so I'm going to have my player go up to this part and we'll check to make sure the frame appears. And we can see whenever the player touches the part that the frame pops up right here. So right now it's stuck on the screen and the player can still walk around. So the next thing we're going to work on is whenever the player has the menu up, we're going to stop this player from moving. Before we move on to the next part of the script, just like for the parts, we're going to give our frame a unique name. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on frame and then press rename. And since we're doing a shop, let's go ahead and call it shop. Since we renamed this to a different name, we're going to have to update our script a little bit. Don't worry, it's not a major change. All we have to do is right here where it says frame, we're going to change that to shop. Okay, and the next thing we're going to work on is, in addition to popping up that menu, we're going to freeze the characters so that they can't move around. We're going to do that inside this if statement here, and we're going to say player dot character, and then from the character we're going to move to the humanoid part. The humanoid has some different properties, and the one that we're going to be changing is the walk speed. So we're going to say dot walk speed, and we're going to set this equal to 0. The default is 16, so when we get ready to allow the player to walk again, we'll be changing that property back to 16. For now though, we're going to keep it at 0 so that they can't walk around whenever the frame is open. Alright, so let's go ahead and run the code and check this out. Okay, so I'm going to have my character walk up to the part. So now my frame still appears, but if I try to walk around, it doesn't let me. What I'm going to do next before we move on to the next part is show you how you can do some troubleshooting. So let's say you run into an error, and our error is going to be a lowercase s right here. So this is a common mistake. For walk speed, instead of doing a capital, I see a lot of people do a lowercase s. So let's go ahead and run the game and check out what happens with this. Okay, so like I did before, I'm going to have my character go over and touch this part. So we can see that the frame still appears, but if I try to walk, I can still walk. So the first thing I want you guys to do whenever this happens and you notice a problem is go up to the View tab and press Output. And the nice thing about this, the red line is going to be the error. So it gives you a description of the error. It says walk speed is not a valid member of humanoid. So what you can do is you can click on that red link, and it'll bring you to the exact line in the code that there's an error. And then you have a couple different options here. You can either go into the comment section and post this error, and we can try to help that way. Or you can always go online and search walk speed. So let's go and open up an internet browser. And what I'm going to do is copy that error message that I got right here. And we'll paste it into Google and we'll see what happens. Okay, and we have a link right here. So let's go and open that up and take a look. And if we scroll down to one of the answers, it says it's walk speed with a capital S, not the way we put it. So that lets us know right away that we made a mistake right there, and we can simply change it right here. And I don't mind if you just post that in the comments, but it's a lot easier to help you that way rather than having a comment that says it doesn't work, and then I have no other information. So if you do have a problem, always check the output first, Google it, or paste it in the comments so that we can help. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is add a little bit more to this frame so that we can start adding something like a close button. We're going to start adding some more elements onto our frame, and before we do that, I would recommend that you guys get some sort of auto scaling for the GUI elements. And the reason you want to do that is because your shop menu will look different on different screen sizes unless you scale them. So one example of this plugin is this one right here, and I'll leave a link for it down in the description. And what this does is you can easily build your frames and not have to worry about it. And then over here in the plugin section, you'll have a scale button that you can press. It'll scale it so that it looks good on all screen sizes. Alright, so the first thing we're going to add to our frame is a close button. So I'm going to make this visible again by clicking on the UI button. And then under the shop in the Explore menu, we're going to click on the plus sign. We're going to be adding a text button. What I'm going to do is make this into a square. So I'm just going to scale it down a little bit until I get 50 by 50. You can make it whatever size you want to though. I'm going to put this up here in the corner. And while we're here, let's go ahead and make a few changes to this menu. So for the actual frame part of it, I'm going to go down in the properties. And then for style, I'm going to change it from custom to drop shadow. Next, for this button, I'm going to rename it. For the name, I'm going to say close button. And now let's just go ahead and make some appearance changes to it. So for the background color, I want to change that to red. So under background color 3, I'm going to click on this white box and then select the color red. For the text of the button, I just want to display the letter X. So down under the text section, where it says text, you want to get rid of this and just put an X. Right now it's a little bit too small. So what you can do is under the text section, you want to look for size. So text size. And then you just want to make it bigger. So 50 looks pretty good. And instead of black text, I'm going to change this to white. Alright, so that's good enough for me, but you can customize it to look however you want to. Now, going back to the script, we're going to be creating a separate function to handle whenever this button gets clicked. So let's go ahead and start making that function. So we're going to say local function. This time we can say close menu. We're not going to have any parameters this time. What we're going to do though is we're going to define the player by saying local player is equal to game dot players dot local player. And then what we're going to do is we're going to close that player's shop GUI. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. So I'm just going to copy this line right here and paste it down below. Instead of true, we're going to change this to false. Alright, so let's go ahead and test it out just to make sure we didn't make any mistakes. Okay, so I'm going to have my player go over here. It opens up the frame like before, and my player can't walk around. So what I'm testing now is to make sure that when I click this button here, it closes the frame. So let's go ahead and click on it. And I can see that nothing happened. So the first thing I'm going to do is check under output. And this time I don't have any errors. So this will happen sometimes, and the best thing to do at this point is just go back to the script and make sure everything looks okay. So if I look at the script, I see that I have my function. But what I forgot to put was the event. So before I had a touch event to open up the shop menu. And what needs to happen now is a mouse click event on the button. And this is what's going to trigger the function to run. So what I need to do to add this event is start by naming the button. So we're going to say local close button. This is going to be equal to frame dot close button. Now down here I can start with that item. So it's going to be close button dot mouse button one click. And then we're going to be connecting this with our function. And the name of our function is close menu. Alright, so let's give it another shot and see if this fixes the issue. Okay, so let's have the player open up the menu. And then we'll click on this button here. And now it closes the menu. The next thing we want to do is allow the player to move again. So right now if I try to move, he's still frozen. So what we're going to do is set the walk speed back to 16. So down below this line right here, we're going to say player dot character dot humanoid dot walk speed. And we're going to set this back to the default, which is 16. Okay, let's run the code and check it out. So I'm going to have my player open up the shop, and we'll click on the close button. And as soon as I do, you see that it glitches again. And I hope you can see the problem. If the player doesn't move away quick enough, then it reopens this menu. So that's the reason that we created this part back here. So the next part we're going to do is teleport the player back to this part so that we don't have this glitching issue. Inside the script, the way that we're going to teleport this player to the other part is we're going to add a line in between these two right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with player, and then we're going to say dot character. This time it's going to be dot humanoid root part. So this is like the main part of the character. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say dot C frame. So this is the position of the player. So this is the position of the part in the game. And we're going to set this equal to a new C frame. So C frame dot new. And inside the parentheses, we're going to say close dot position dot X. And inside these parentheses, we're going to be putting an X position, a Y, and also a Z. So what I'm going to do is just copy this 2 more times. We'll change this to Y, and then we'll do one more for the Z. And then we just want to make sure it's a capital Z over here. Okay, so we took the close part and got its X, Y, and Z position. Let's go ahead and run the game and check this out. Okay, so now I'll go to open up the shop, and when I click on the X button, it looks like it kind of worked. It teleported the player to this part, but it looks like he got stuck on the ground. So what we need to do is teleport the player a little bit above this part, and we can do that pretty easily by just going over to the Y position and saying plus, and then some small amount. Let's try 3. Let's go ahead and run the code again and check this out. Now, when I go to close this menu, he teleports right on top of the part without any glitching issues. Alright, so far everything looks good. The next thing we're going to do is add some more elements onto the frame, such as buy buttons and also images. For this next part, we're going to be adding some different elements onto the frame, such as images and also buttons. So this is the part where we're going to really start using that plugin. So let's go ahead and start by adding a couple buttons, and then we'll work on some images. So for under the shop here, we're going to click on the plus sign, and we're going to be adding a text button. Let's drag this somewhere near the bottom. And then we're going to be adding a couple more of these. In this video, I'm just going to do 3 buttons, but you can do as many as you want to by following the same process. So what I'm going to do first is give each of these buttons a unique name. So for this one, I'm going to rename it. And we can keep it simple. I'm just going to say buy, and then the number 1. For the second one, it's going to be buy 2. And then for the third one, it's going to be buy 3. Okay, so now we can just make some appearance changes to these buttons. So I'm not going to do very much with these. I'm just going to go down to the text section, change it from button to the number sign, and then the value I want to charge. So for the first one, I'm going to charge 100. For the second one, let's change this to 500. And then for the third one, we'll do 1,000. Okay, we'll just do a few more minor changes. I'm just going to increase the text size a little bit. And then I'm also going to change the font. And then we'll just do the same thing for each one. So we'll change the font and also the size. Okay, so that looks good enough for me. So the way we're going to use that plugin is we're going to go up to the plugin section. And let's go and start by scaling the frame. So we're going to click on the frame. We'll click on plugins. And then under the size section, we're going to click on scale. You'll get the message that says convert it to scale, and that means you're good. So next, let's go and do the same thing for each of the buttons. So we'll start with the close button. We'll go to plugins, scale it. And then for buy 1, we'll go ahead and scale that. We'll do it for buy 2 and for buy 3. So now to show you what this does, if you click on the 2 little devices up here, you can change the screen size. And what you'll notice is no matter what screen size I choose, the frame fits nicely on the screen size. And we'll just try a couple more just so I can show you. So no matter what the screen size, it resizes it so that it fits nicely on whatever screen the player is playing on. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is add a couple image labels for these items. To do that, we're going to go back to the shop and click on the plus sign. This time we're going to be adding an image label. So let's go ahead and get it right here, and then we'll make it a little bit larger. So I'm going to do 150 by 150. Let's do 175 by 175. And instead of inserting a new image through the plus sign, I'm just going to click on this one and press duplicate, so Control D. And then I'll move it in front of this one, and then move it in front of the last one. There we go. We're going to resize these ones and convert them to scale. So we're just going to click on each one and go to plugins just like we did before. There we go. So the last thing I want to add to this menu is a title up at the top here. So for that, we're going to insert a text label. There we go. And we'll remember to scale it. Let's go ahead and give it a new title. So I'm just going to keep it simple and say Shop Menu. I'll give it a new font and also a bigger size. There we go. So I'm not going to do anything fancy as far as the design process. I'm mainly just going to focus on the scripting behind this, and you guys can customize this to make it look however you want to. The next thing we're going to do is get some images for our image labels. So we're going to take some pictures that we can put right here. So what I did is I took 3 random tools from the toolbox. When you're selecting a tool from the toolbox, it's important to look inside the tool to make sure it has a part named handle. Some tools are composed of a bunch of random parts, and usually those don't work as well. So when you're looking for tools or weapons, just double check inside the tool or weapon that it has a part named handle. In addition to the tools, I also got a part that I'm going to use as the background. The way I'm going to be getting an image of these tools is by using the snipping tool. So on Windows, you can just search down here and search for snipping, and you'll see a snipping tool. And then what you want to do is just press New, and then you're going to make a selection box around the tool. And you want to try to get the selection box around the same for each tool. So after you do that, you're going to press File, and then Save As. Go ahead and give it a name. So for this one, I'm just going to say Gun. I'm going to press New, and then let's go ahead and do the sword now. Okay, we'll go ahead and give this one a name. So for this one, I already have it saved, so I'm just going to use that one instead. And then we'll press New one more time and get an image of the last one. And for this one, I'm just going to call it Hyper. Okay, so after you take the images of the tools, what you want to do is open up the frame again. You want to click on the frame in the Explorer menu, and then you want to find each image label. And while we're here, let's go ahead and give them unique names. So for the first one, I'm going to right-click and then press Rename. For this one, we can just say something like Item 1. And then what we want to do next is go down to Properties. And we're going to be looking for this section right here where it says Image. You're going to click on this part right here, and then click on Add Image. You're going to click on Choose File next. After that, we're going to add the image in. So for the first one, let's add the gun. And then we're going to press Create. And then when you do that, it appears in the image label. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for the other two. So we're going to start over here. We'll right-click, rename. This one, we're just going to say Item 2. Down for the image, we're going to press Add Image. We're going to Choose File. This one we're going to do for the sword. And then press Create. And then for the last one, we're going to rename. This is going to be Item 3. And then for the image, we're going to choose Hyper. So choose File, and then we'll click on the last one. Alright, and there we go. So we have 3 different images for our different tools. For these image labels, you can move them and resize them however you want to. For now though, we're going to move on to the script and start working with these buttons down at the bottom here. Inside the script, we're going to start by making variables for the new buttons that we added. So up here at the top, we're going to make a couple new variables. The first one, we're going to say local, and then by_1. This is going to be equal to frame dot by 1. Then we'll say local by_2. This is going to be equal to frame dot by 2. And then for the last one, we're going to say local by 3. It's going to be equal to frame dot by 2. So on this side, it's just the variable name, so this can be whatever you want to. On the other side, this is the object name. So this has to be exactly the same as what you have it in the Explorer menu. Down at the bottom, we're going to set up the events. So we're going to say by _1 dot mouse button one click. We're going to connect this with a function. We don't have that function yet, so we're just going to leave it empty for now. I'm going to copy this 2 more times. Okay, so now we have our 3 different events set up, one for each button. So what we can do next is start working on the functions that'll actually give the item to the player. So let's go ahead and set up some blank functions for now, and then we'll add some more stuff to it. So we're going to say local function. For the name of the function, we can say by tool1. We're not going to actually give the item to the player through this local script. What we're going to do on the local side is send a message to the server, and then on the server side, that's where we're going to handle giving out the tools. So for now though, what we're going to do is set up the remote events. So the first thing we're going to do is go under replicated storage. We're going to click on the plus sign and then add a remote event. If you're using multiple remote events in your game, you want to give them separate names. So let's go ahead and rename this one to by tool. And then we'll set up the variables for the remote event. So up here at the top, we're going to create 2 different variables. The first one, we're going to say local replicated storage is going to be equal to game : get service. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put replicated storage. And then down here, we're going to say local remote event. This is going to be equal to replicated storage because that's where it's stored. And then we're going to say : wait for child. And inside the parentheses will be the name of the remote event, which is by tool. Inside this function, what we're going to do is trigger the remote event. So we're going to say remote event dot fire server. Inside the parentheses will be some additional information that we want to send to the server. For now though, we're just going to leave it blank. And here I just noticed it's not a dot, it's actually a colon. Okay, so what we're going to do next is start working on the server side of things. So to do that, we're going to go up to the server script service. And we're going to be adding a script. I'm going to rename this script to by script. The first thing we're going to do inside the script is set up the variables for the remote event. So I'm going to go back to the local side. We're going to copy these 2 lines right here and paste them right here. Then we're going to set up the event so that whenever the client triggers the server, we can run a function. To do that, we're going to say remote event dot on server event. And then we're going to connect this with a function. And then for this function, let's go ahead and just do local function. The name of our function can be by tool. Inside the parentheses, we get the player variable automatically. So whoever triggers the server, that information will be served in the player variable. And then all we're going to do for now is we're going to say print. And then inside the parentheses, we're going to put player.name. So what this is going to do is whenever the player clicks on the buy button, it's going to print their name in the output. And we're just using this for testing. So once we see that this works, we're going to replace this with the actual buying script. Before we run this code, we're going to head back to the local script and make a few changes. And on the local script, what we need to do is connect this event right here, which is when that first button gets clicked. We need to connect this to the function. So inside the parentheses here, we're going to put by tool1. And then since we're not using these other events yet, we're going to make them comments by doing 2 dash marks. That way, when we run the game, these are not going to run. Once we see that this is working, then we'll go back and add the other 2. So now if we take a look at this in the game, I'm going to click on this button right here, and then we'll go ahead and open up the output, and we can see in the output I have my name. So whenever the player clicks on this button, it prints out the name. So what that does, it lets me know that the remote event is working properly, and now we can work on actually giving out the items. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do to start giving out these items is under the replicated storage. We're going to click on the plus sign and add a folder. We're going to rename this folder to shop items. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to move each of our tools into this folder. So before I move them, I just want to double check to make sure that there's no welds on these items. So the sword looks good. So I'm going to drag it from this position right here to the shop items folder. Next, we'll go ahead and check the Tommy gun. So I'm just going to open it up and double check for any welds. So this one has a weld, so I'm going to delete it. And we'll check on the other part. Okay, so everything else looks good. So now I'm going to move this gun inside the folder. Finally, we'll check the last one. So there was a weld inside this one too, so I'm going to delete it and then move it into the folder. We're going to start in the local script and then we're going to move back to the server script service. So in the local script, and then inside this function, I'm going to say local tool, and this is going to be equal to replicated storage. Inside the replicated storage, it's inside the shop items folder. And then the first one is going to be the Tommy gun. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this item to the server by including it inside the parentheses. And now we're going to head to the server side. And in addition to the player, we're also going to receive the tool. So now instead of printing off the player's name, let's print off the tool's name. So now if I go into the game and try the button now, if I look under the output, I can see the item's name, which was Tommy gun. So it seems like this is working fine. So we're going to set up the other two buttons now. So on the local script, we're going to start by getting rid of the two dash marks. And then we're going to copy this function 2 more times. We're going to change this one to 2, and then this one to 3. And then all we need to do is update the item. So the second one is going to be the sword. So the name of the sword is Classic Sword. And then the name of the third item is Hyper. And then before we run the game, we're going to add the functions to the events down here. So this one is going to be by tool 2. And then the last one will be by tool 3. Okay, so let's run the game and make sure all the buttons are working. Okay, so I have my menu open, and I'm also going to have the output open. We can try the first one. So it says Tommy gun. This one says Classic Sword. And this one says Hyper. So now we know all the buttons are working, and now we can work toward the last step of giving out the tools. So to give out these tools, we're going to start under the server script service. So that's our buy script. We're going to go ahead and delete this print message. And the way we're going to be giving these items to the player is we're going to make a copy of the item that's stored in the replicated storage. And then we're going to either give that to the player's backpack or the starter gear. So let's go ahead and start by saying local give tool. This is going to be equal to replicated storage dot shop items. And then I'm going to say square bracket and then tool dot name. So it's going to look in the shop items folder for the tool's name. And then after that, we're going to say colon and clone. So this is the part that makes the copy of it. Then we're going to say give tool dot parent. And this is going to be equal to player dot backpack. So the backpack gives it to the player. When the player dies, they lose this item. If you want them to keep this item, then what you can do is make another copy of it. And instead of giving it to the player's backpack, you're going to give it to the player's starter gear. For now, we're not charging any money for these items. We're just basically saying whenever you click on this button, we're going to give you the tool. Once we see that that's working, then we can start working on charging the player for these items. All right, so I have the menu open. Let's try the first item. We see that it appears down here. So that looks good for the first one. We'll try the second one. And the third one. So all the items appear, and I can equip these items. And everything looks good. So the last step is just setting up a leader stats with some currency so that we can actually charge the player for these items when they buy the tools. So we're going to start by setting up a leader stats script so that we can introduce some currency into the game. So under the server script service, we're going to click on the plus sign and add a script. For this one, I'm going to rename it to leader stats. Okay, and I know this video is getting kind of long, so I went ahead and skipped me typing this out. And I'll just quickly go over the script. If you want more information on how to set up leader stats, I have a separate video for that. So basically what the script does is whenever a player joins the game, which is this event down here, it's going to run this function. The first thing this function does is sets up a folder called leader stats. It stores that folder with the player. And then inside this folder, it's going to be creating an int value, which will be your currency. So in this case, my currency is money. You can also set a value for your currency. I'm choosing 5,000 just so we can test some items. And then we're storing this value inside the leader stats. So the only part of the script that you'll really need to change is this section right here, depending on what currency you want to have in your game. Okay, so let's go back to the buy script so that we can see how we can charge players for these items. So to be able to charge the players for these items, they need to have a price to them. So what we're going to do is under each item in the shop is we're going to click on the plus sign, and then we're going to search for int value. We're going to rename this int value to price. And then under the value section for this value, we're going to put the price of the tool. So for the classic sword, that was 500. Let's do the same thing for the Tommy gun. So it's going to be an int value. We're going to rename it to price. And then for the value, this one was 100. And finally for hyper, we'll add an int value. Rename it to price. And then this one was 1,000. Okay, so on the script, what we need to do is look at the player's money and compare this to the price of the tool. And if they have enough money to buy the tool, then we'll go ahead and give it to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if player dot leader stats dot money dot value, and if this is greater than or equal to tool dot price dot value, then what we're going to do is we're going to give the player the item. And in addition to giving the item to the player, we also want to charge them for it. So right up top here, we're going to say player dot leader stats dot money dot value is going to be equal to their current money. So I'm going to copy this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to subtract the price of the tool. So that's going to be tool dot price dot value. Okay, so basically what we're doing is we're taking a look at the player's current money, and if that is greater than or equal to the price of the tool, then we'll go ahead and charge the player for that tool, and we'll give the player the item. Let's go ahead and run the game and check it out. Okay, so while we test this out, we're going to be taking a look up in the corner for the money and see if it actually charges the player for the item. So for the first one, we're going to click on it. We got the tool, and then up here it subtracted $100. If I click on this one, I got the tool, it subtracted $500. And for this last one, if I click on it, it charges the player, and I got the tool. So it looks like everything is working. And before we wrap up this video, we're going to do a quick local server test to make sure it works for other players in the game. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to test is to make sure that each player can open the shop and close it. Okay, so it looks good for that player, and let's try to close it now. Okay, everything looks fine. Let's try it for the other player. Everything looks good. Let's try to have both players open the frame. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to buy the tool for the left player. Okay, everything looks okay so far. I'm going to buy the second tool for this player. And it looks like everything's working. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up this video now. I know it was quite long, but hopefully after this video, if you made it through at least part of it, you have a better understanding of the shop menus, and I cleared up any confusion on the prior videos. So I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for the next one.